My name is David Miller. I live in a quiet suburb outside Portland, Oregon, where the nights are calm and the mornings smell of pine and rain. But this peace you hear in my voice, it wasn't always there. There was a time when silence used to hurt. When I'd sit in this same room, counting the coins in my hand, wondering how I'd pay rent, wondering how life could turn so cold so quickly. And the one person I thought would stand beside me, my own brother Michael, was the one who walked away first. It's strange how life teaches you who truly loves you, not when you rise, but when you fall. Michael and I grew up together in this very town. He was always the confident one. Good in school, charming, the kind of person everyone trusted instantly. I admired him. I really did. He had dreams of becoming a corporate executive, while I wanted to build something of my own, a small business, something real, something that made me proud. When our father passed away, he left us little more than his old pickup truck and a few words written on a crumpled note. Take care of each other. That's all that matters. I tried my best to live by that line. Michael didn't. After college, he joined a big logistics company in the city and began earning well. I, on the other hand, started small, repairing home appliances out of my garage. It wasn't much, but it was honest work. The first few years were rough. Clients were few, bills were many. But what truly broke me wasn't the struggle. It was Michael's change. At first, he'd visit occasionally, a quick lunch, a pat on the back, a keep trying little brother. But as his life got busier and his suits got sharper, his tone changed. One evening, I asked him for help, not money, just a small loan to buy some tools I desperately needed for a project. He looked at me and smiled, the kind of smile that hides pity. David, he said, you're too soft for business. You don't have what it takes. Just find a job somewhere. This dream of yours, it's not going anywhere. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't defend my dream. I just nodded, thanked him for dinner, and walked home in the rain. What he didn't know was that I cried that night, not because of his rejection, but because I realized something deeper. He didn't see me anymore. To him, I was just the poor brother who never made it. For the next few months, I barely spoke to him. When our mother, Linda, asked why, I just said, "He's busy, Mom." I didn't want her heart to ache the way mine did. But words travel, and soon even she began to believe what he said, that I was wasting my time chasing a dream that would never work. I remember the day she asked me quietly at breakfast, "David, maybe you should listen to your brother. You've been working too hard for too little." I smiled. Because what else could I do? Sometimes even love doubts you. The truth is, I did fail many times. Machines broke down, clients disappeared without paying, and I barely had enough for food. I lived off coffee and hope. But I held on to one simple belief, that the only thing more powerful than money is patience. And so I waited. I learned. I worked quietly, day and night. I didn't know then that life was preparing me for something greater. Because one day, everything changed. It started with an old customer, a kind man named Mr. Reynolds, who owned a chain of electronic stores across the state. He had once watched me repair his old coffee machine, and he remembered how carefully I'd handled every part. "You ever thought about scaling up, David?" he asked. "You've got hands that fix things, not just machines but trust." Those words stayed with me. Within a year, I partnered with him to start a small repair company, Miller Tech Solutions. It began in a rented workshop behind a gas station. And though it was tiny, it was the start of something I could finally call mine. I didn't tell Michael. I didn't need his approval anymore. But fate has a strange sense of timing. Because 2 years later, when my company was worth more than his salary, and I had 30 employees under me, Michael came knocking again. And this time, his tone was different. He wasn't the proud brother anymore. He was the one in need. That's where my story truly begins. When the one who once ignored me came back, not out of love, but out of convenience. And for the first time in years, I smiled again. Not out of pain.
but out of peace.
I used to believe that family meant forever. That no matter how hard life became, the people who shared your name would always stand beside you. But I learned painfully that love sometimes bends under pressure, especially when pride gets involved. After that night when Michael refused to help me, things between us became polite but distant. He'd still visit Mom on weekends, always bringing expensive groceries and stories about company parties. She'd beam with pride, telling neighbors how well her elder son was doing. And I'd just sit in the corner, smiling softly, pretending not to notice the way Michael avoided meeting my eyes. I wasn't angry. Not really. I understood him, or at least, I thought I did. Michael was raised to believe that success defined worth. And in his eyes, my greasy hands and small garage business didn't fit that picture. Mom, too, began comparing us unconsciously. Not out of malice, but because that's what society teaches parents to do. At dinner, she'd say things like, "Michael says his company's expanding. Maybe he can help you find a stable job, David." I'd just nod and change the subject. Because deep down I knew, no one can see your vision if it's still in the making. Those were lonely years. Days filled with noise from machines, nights filled with silence. The smell of oil, metal, and burnt wires became part of my life. I'd fix things for people who barely remembered my name, yet every repair felt like a step closer to something invisible, something mine. Sometimes I'd hear laughter from across the street, families having dinner, children running, someone's dog barking, and I'd feel a strange ache in my chest. Not jealousy. Just emptiness. Then came Emma. She was a schoolteacher who lived 2 blocks away. One evening her washing machine broke, and someone told her, "Go to David Miller's garage, he fixes everything." She showed up at my door holding a basket of laundry, smiling shyly. "I hear you're the man who brings machines back to life," she said. I remember laughing for the first time in months. She watched quietly as I repaired her washer, asking small questions about the tools. When I finished, she insisted on paying extra. I refused, but she left homemade cookies on my table anyway. That's how it started. One broken machine, 2 shy smiles, and suddenly, my world didn't feel so empty anymore. Emma didn't care that I was struggling. She liked that I was trying. She'd stop by after school with sandwiches and tea, saying, "You fix machines, I'll fix your appetite." Within a year, we got married. It was a small ceremony, just a few close friends and Mom. Michael didn't come. He said he was caught up at work. I remember standing outside the small town chapel, holding Emma's hand, watching cars pass by, and wondering if success really had to mean loneliness. But when I looked at her, smiling in her simple white dress, I realized, maybe I already had everything I needed. Life got better after that. Slowly, people started trusting my work. I fixed air conditioners, refrigerators, even a few office machines. Emma handled the calls, the payments, the clients. She was the backbone of everything I built. Mom visited often, bringing leftover food and gentle smiles. She loved Emma, maybe even more than me. But she still couldn't stop comparing. "Michael's planning to buy a new car," she'd say. "You two should visit him in the city sometime." We did visit once. And it was enough to remind me of my place in his world. Michael's apartment looked like something out of a magazine. The first thing he said when he saw me wasn't hello but, "You look tired, David. How's the garage?" Emma smiled politely, though I saw her hands tighten around her purse. Dinner was formal. He spoke about stock prices, promotions, and corporate politics. I spoke about broken microwaves and old motors. When we left, Emma said softly, "He doesn't know who you really are yet." I didn't reply. Because at that time, I didn't either. A few months later, Mom fell ill, nothing too serious, just age catching up. Michael covered her medical bills, and for that, I was grateful. But it came with unspoken strings. Every time I visited her in the hospital, he'd say things like, "You should have done more for her, David. She deserves better than your garage dreams. Those words used to sting. But Emma's calm presence always healed me. She'd whisper, "One day they'll understand. Not because you'll prove them wrong, but because time will." And she was right. Time has a way of revealing truth without shouting. Then, just as things were finally turning hopeful, life tested me again. Emma fell sick, sudden, unexpected. Doctors called it an infection, something that spread too quickly to fight. 3 weeks later, she was gone. I buried her under a maple tree near our town's edge. That day, I didn't cry. I just sat there until the sky turned gray, thinking how everything I built seemed to fall apart again. Michael didn't attend the funeral. He sent flowers with a note that said, "Stay strong, little brother." Mom was there, holding my hand, but even she didn't know what to say. For months after, I worked without rest. The garage became my escape. People thought I was losing myself, but in truth, I was rebuilding. Because grief, it either breaks you or reshapes you. And I chose the latter. By the time I turned 35, my work had caught the attention of Mr. Reynolds, the businessman who'd later become my mentor. He taught me what no university could: how to scale effort into enterprise. Together, we built something that started small but grew beyond imagination. When my first branch opened, I didn't invite Michael. Not out of pride, but because I'd finally realized I didn't need validation anymore. And yet, deep inside, a part of me still wondered, would he ever see me as more than the poor brother? That question would soon be answered, in ways I never expected. Because when fate decided to turn the tables, it did so quietly, beautifully, and with poetic justice. And that was only the beginning of my calm revenge. Years passed, and time reshaped me in silence. The small workshop behind the gas station had grown into a proper facility. Walls freshly painted, staff uniforms clean and pressed, the faint smell of metal and ambition in the air. I used to wake up before sunrise, drive down that empty road, and unlock the doors to Miller Tech Solutions. There was something sacred about those mornings. The quiet hum of machines warming up, the way the first light touched the company's name on the signboard. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was proof. Proof that patience can build what pride never could. Mr. Reynolds and I had opened our third branch in a neighboring city. We had contracts with electronic retailers, office complexes, and even schools. Every invoice felt like a small victory. And though my success was never about revenge, I'd be lying if I said Michael didn't cross my mind from time to time. Not out of bitterness, but curiosity. I wondered if he ever thought about those words he'd once said to me. "You don't have what it takes." Fate, however, has its own rhythm. One evening, as I was locking up the office, my phone buzzed. It was Mom. "David," she said softly, "could you come for dinner this weekend? Your brother will be there too. I think it's time you two talk again." I hesitated. It had been years since Michael and I had spoken. But Mom's voice carried a tone I couldn't refuse, the kind that comes from love and age. So I agreed. That Saturday, I drove to her house. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed the silence. Gone were the proud photographs of Michael in suits, replaced by softer family pictures from older times. He was already there, sitting at the table, same confident posture, but his eyes looked tired. "David," he said, standing up. "It's been a while." "It has," I replied quietly. Dinner was polite, almost too polite. Mom tried to bridge the space between us, asking about my company and about Michael's work. I told her we were expanding into new cities. Michael said his department was going through restructuring. It was subtle, but I could hear the strain behind his words. He was struggling, and I could feel it. After dinner, when Mom went into the kitchen, he turned to me. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "I've been lucky," I answered. He smiled faintly. "Luck favors those who work for it, I guess." Then there was silence. It wasn't the same arrogance I once knew. It was something else. Maybe realization. Maybe regret. When I left that night, he walked me to the door. "We should catch up sometime," he said. I nodded. "We should." And I meant it, not out of emotion, but because I finally had nothing left to prove. A few months later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Michael. He asked if we could meet for coffee. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind with quiet jazz and people working on laptops. He looked different. The confidence was still there, but it had cracks now. After a few polite exchanges, he sighed deeply. "David, I'll be honest with you. Things haven't been good at work. The company's cutting positions. They're downsizing, and I might be next." I listened silently. "You've built something solid," he continued. "And I was wondering if you have any openings. Maybe I could help manage operations? I've got experience with logistics and finance." That moment, it felt like life had come full circle. Years ago, I had stood before him, asking for help, and he had turned me away with a smile. Now he was sitting across from me, asking for a chance, his pride wrapped in polite words. But revenge doesn't always come with rage. Sometimes it comes in silence, with the quiet strength of a man who no longer needs validation. "Michael," I said gently, "I appreciate that you'd think of me. But right now, our operations are full. I'll keep you in mind if something opens up." He nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. I understand." There was no anger in his tone, just quiet defeat. When we stood up to leave, he extended his hand. "I'm proud of you, David," he said. "You made it." I shook his hand firmly. "We both did what we could," I replied. Over the next year, our paths crossed more often. Mom's health was declining, and family gatherings became frequent. Michael had found a smaller job in a regional firm, but his old spark was gone. He'd occasionally drop hints about money troubles, bills, mortgage delays, his car needing repairs. And I helped quietly. Not to humiliate him, but because that's what decent men do. I'd pay Mom's hospital bills before he could, or cover maintenance costs without mentioning it. He'd find out, of course. He'd call and say, "You didn't have to do that." And I'd reply, "I know." It wasn't pity. It was closure. One afternoon, Mom called me to her bedside. "You and your brother," she said, her voice weak, "you're all I have. Promise me you won't hold grudges. Family, it's more fragile than pride." I held her hand and smiled softly. "I don't hold grudges, Mom. I just remember the lessons." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Months passed. Then one morning, I received another call from Michael, his voice shaky. "David, I need to talk. It's urgent." We met again, this time at his house. It wasn't the same polished place I remembered. Furniture was old, boxes stacked near the hallway. He looked pale, exhausted. "They laid me off," he said quietly. "After 15 years, just like that. They said I was too expensive for their new structure." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Can you believe that? Too expensive." I stood there, hands in my pockets, listening to every word. "I just need a little time," he continued. "I'll get back up. I always do." He was trying to sound strong, but his eyes told another story. For a moment, I remembered that younger version of myself, standing in front of him years ago, begging for a chance, being told I wasn't enough. And now here he was, echoing that same desperation. But I didn't want him to feel what I once felt. So I placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You'll be fine, Michael. You're smart. You'll find your way." He nodded silently, avoiding eye contact. In that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about making someone else fall. It was about rising so peacefully that they could see, without words, what they had missed. As months rolled by, my company expanded further. We entered new markets, signed partnerships with manufacturers, and gained recognition in business journals. One of those magazines published a full feature, From Garage to Greatness, the story of Miller Tech Solutions. The article went viral locally. That week, Mom called me, voice full of pride. "Everyone's talking about you, David. Even Michael showed me the article." When I visited her that weekend, I saw it, the magazine lying neatly on the coffee table. Michael was sitting beside her, flipping through the pages silently. He looked up, eyes meeting mine. "You've done good," he said simply. "I guess I was wrong." I smiled softly. "We all are sometimes." He chuckled weakly. "You really built something special, huh?" "I just fixed what was broken," I said. There was no need for more words. He understood. Not through humiliation, not through anger, but through quiet truth. And that was enough. That year, Mom passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her last words to me were simple. "Stay kind, David. The world has enough people who win loud. Be the one who wins quietly." At her funeral, Michael stood beside me, shoulders trembling. When it was over, he turned and said, "I should have been more like you." I looked at him, the same man who once believed I was nothing, and I saw not a rival, but a broken reflection of pride. "No," I said softly. "You should just be better than who you were." That day, something shifted between us. There was no apology spoken, no forgiveness demanded. But sometimes, silence carries more weight than words. Time went on. Michael eventually found work again, not glamorous but steady. We started talking more, sharing dinner sometimes, even laughing. He never asked me for help again. And I never brought up the past. Because real peace doesn't come from reminding others how they failed you. It comes from knowing you no longer need to. That was the season when life truly turned the tables. Not through revenge, but through quiet, undeniable balance. By the time Miller Tech Solutions reached its 4th year, we weren't just surviving, we were leading. We handled contracts from 3 major electronics retailers, and my team had grown to nearly 70 employees. Each time I walked through those workshop doors, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the loud kind that needs to be shown off, but the quiet kind that sits deep in your chest. I often thought of my father's note, "Take care of each other." For a long time, I believed I had failed that promise. But now, standing in that sunlit office, I realized, maybe I was just fulfilling it differently, by becoming someone strong enough to forgive. That morning, my assistant Rachel walked in holding a sleek gray envelope. "This came for you, sir," she said. "From Cooper Logistics." I froze. That was Michael's company. I opened the letter carefully. Inside was a formal request. They were seeking a service provider for their entire repair and maintenance department. In simpler words, they wanted to hire my company. I stared at the page for a while, reading the words over and over, not because I didn't understand them, but because I couldn't believe how life had come full circle. I didn't respond immediately. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not out of arrogance. Not out of revenge. But because fate had written a scene too poetic to ignore. When we met 2 weeks later, he looked almost the same, except for a few gray hairs and a nervous smile that couldn't quite hide the cracks. He extended his hand. "David," he said, "it's been a long time." I nodded, shaking it firmly. "Yes, it has." There was silence between us. Not anger. Not resentment. Just distance. He gestured for me to sit, sliding the contract across the table. "We've heard great things about your company," he said. "Our management believes a partnership would be mutually beneficial." His tone was professional, but his eyes told another story, one of quiet disbelief. He hadn't expected me to succeed. "It's funny," I said calmly, "how the world spins. A few years ago, I was the one asking you for help. Now you're asking me." He looked down, embarrassed. "I was young, David. Stupid. I didn't mean to." "You don't need to explain," I interrupted gently. "It's all in the past." But deep down, I knew the moment had arrived. This wasn't about revenge, not the kind that burns. This was about balance. Over the next few weeks, our companies began working together. Michael often had to visit my office for meetings. Each time he stepped into my space, where employees greeted me with respect, where my name was etched on the glass door, I could see his pride shrinking just a little. He tried to mask it with politeness, but his eyes always wandered to the framed awards, the signed contracts, the confidence in my team. It wasn't what I said that hurt him. It was what he saw. And I never once rubbed it in. That was my revenge. Silent. Controlled. Earned. One Friday afternoon, while reviewing reports, my assistant buzzed in. "Your brother's here to see you, sir." I looked up from the paperwork. "Send him in." Michael entered, holding a small box. He smiled awkwardly. "I thought I'd bring something for old time's sake," he said. Inside was a vintage wristwatch, the same model our father used to wear. "I found this in Mom's old things," he continued. "Figured you should have it." I held it carefully. The metal was scratched, but the ticking was steady. "Thank you," I said softly. He'd be happy to see us sitting together again. He nodded, his voice lower now. "You did well, David. I mean, look at all this. I was wrong about you." I looked at him, really looked at him. For years, I had imagined this moment filled with anger or pride. But all I felt was peace. "No, Michael," I said gently. "You weren't wrong. You just couldn't see what I was trying to build. Sometimes, people only understand your worth once it's printed on paper." He smiled faintly, unable to argue. Before leaving, he said something that stayed with me. "You're a better man than I ever was, David." That night, I visited our old house, the one Mom had left behind before moving to Florida. It was empty, except for a few memories still clinging to the walls. I sat on the porch, listening to the rain hit the roof, the same sound that once comforted me when I was broke. I thought about revenge, how it's never really about hurting someone. It's about reclaiming your dignity without raising your voice. When Michael came to me for business, I could have humiliated him. I could have rejected his deal just like he once rejected me. But I didn't. Because real strength doesn't come from saying no. It comes from being in control enough to say yes with grace. A few months later, something unexpected happened. Michael's company faced internal troubles, poor management, rising debts, and a major client pulling out. He called me one evening. His voice was heavy, cracked with exhaustion. "David, things aren't good here. I might have to step down." I paused before answering. "I'm sorry to hear that, brother. If there's anything I can do, let me know." He sighed. "Just hearing that from you means more than you think." After that call, I sat in silence for a long time. Not because I was happy, but because I understood how the universe restores balance without you lifting a finger. A few months later, Cooper Logistics filed for bankruptcy. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Instead, I called Michael and offered him a position, not as an executive, not as a favor, but as a consultant in my company. He hesitated at first, maybe out of pride. But eventually he accepted. Watching him walk into my office as an employee was a quiet victory. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally let go. He worked diligently, respectfully, never once forgetting how far we'd both come. And though we rarely spoke of the past, I could see regret in his every glance. Not the kind that begs for forgiveness, but the kind that lives with understanding. That's the beauty of silent revenge. It doesn't need fire or fury. It just needs time, and a steady heart that refuses to turn bitter. Because in the end, the people who once doubted you will always come back, not for forgiveness, but for a glimpse of the peace they lost. And when they do, all you have to do is smile. 3 years had passed since Michael joined my company. In that time, a lot had changed. Not just in business, but in us. He was no longer the proud executive who measured worth by suits and numbers. He had become quieter, more observant, almost humbled by the strange turns life had taken. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring out the window during lunch breaks, lost in thought, coffee untouched, his eyes distant. I never asked what he was thinking, but I knew. Regret has its own language. It doesn't always speak in words. The company had grown beyond anything I once imagined. We had expanded to multiple cities, with contracts from several corporate clients. People now came to me for advice, for mentorship, young men who reminded me of myself years ago. One afternoon, after a staff meeting, Michael came into my office. He waited quietly until everyone left, then said, "You've built something incredible, David." I smiled lightly.
"We've built it, Michael."
"You've been a big part of this too."
He shook his head.
"No, I don't think I ever said it properly. You did this, even when no one believed in you."
"Not Mom. Not me."
"You just kept going."
I looked at him.
His voice wasn't just honest, it was tired. The kind of tired that comes after years of fighting with your own conscience. "You know," I said, "I used to think revenge was about proving someone wrong.
But now,
I think it's about proving yourself right."
He nodded slowly.
"And you did that." A few weeks later, Mom came to visit from Florida. She was older now, her step slower, her smile still the same. When she entered my office for the first time, she looked around in awe. "So this is where my boys work," she said softly. Michael walked in behind her, carrying her handbag and a box of cookies she'd baked herself. The three of us sat together for the first time in years. No tension, no pride, no unspoken weight between us. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm proud of you, David. I didn't always understand what you were doing, but now I see it."
I smiled. "It's all right, Mom."
"You believed in us in your own way."
She turned to Michael. "And you, my eldest.
I hope you've learned to be gentler with your brother." He lowered his gaze and whispered, "More than you know." For a moment, silence filled the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore.
It was healing.
That evening, after she left, Michael and I drove to the lake where our father used to take us fishing. The same wooden dock still stood, weathered and creaking under our feet. The sun was setting, painting the water with streaks of orange and gold. Michael stood beside me, hands in his pockets. "You ever think about Dad?" he asked.
"Every day," I said.
"Especially that note he left, 'Take care of each other.'"
He sighed.
"I failed that, didn't I?"
"No," I said quietly.
"You just took longer to learn it." He nodded, eyes glassy but calm. "You know, when you were struggling, I told myself I was being realistic. That I was saving you from wasting your time. But truth is, I just couldn't handle seeing you dream bigger than me." I looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "That's a hard thing to admit." "Yeah," he said softly. "And I think that's why life humbled me. It had to." The wind rippled across the lake. For the first time in years, I saw the brother I grew up with. Not the proud man who once looked down on me, but the boy who used to race me to this same dock, laughing barefoot through the grass. In the weeks that followed, things between us became easy. We didn't talk about the past much. We didn't need to. We'd already said everything through our actions. He worked hard, treated every employee with respect, and often stayed late helping the younger staff. Once, I overheard him telling one of the new recruits, "Don't ever underestimate a small start. Every big thing you see began in someone's garage." I smiled when I heard that. Because that line wasn't his. It was mine. Years ago, I'd said the same thing to him, when he laughed at my little workshop. Now he was passing it on. That's how life balances itself, not with punishment, but with perspective. One Friday, as the office closed for the weekend, Michael came to my desk with a small envelope. "This is for you," he said. Inside was a handwritten note. It read, "For every time I doubted you, thank you for not giving up on yourself. You didn't just build a business, David. You built me back into your brother. I looked up at him. Words failed me for a second. All I could do was shake his hand. We're good, Michael, I said quietly. We've always been. We just took a long way around. He smiled. Yeah. But maybe that's how it was supposed to happen. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sky turn darker by the minute. I thought about everything: the betrayal, the years of silence, the unexpected reunion, the balance that life had restored. Revenge had brought me peace, but not in the way I expected. It didn't come from seeing him fail. It came from watching both of us grow, from anger to understanding. Because in the end, the person I truly wanted to prove something to wasn't him. It was me. The man who once cried in the rain after being told he'd never make it. The man who kept going when no one was watching. And I realized something that night. Success doesn't make revenge sweet. Forgiveness does. Years later, when I told this story to a group of young entrepreneurs at a local seminar, one of them asked, "Mr. Miller, what's your biggest lesson from all this?" I paused, smiling slightly. That sometimes silence is the best revenge. You don't have to fight every battle. Some people only understand your worth when you stop trying to prove it. The room was quiet. Everyone was listening. And for a moment, I saw my younger self sitting in that audience, tired, doubted, hopeful. I wanted to tell him, don't rush. Let time do the talking. Because time has a way of rewarding patience and humbling pride. As I turned off the last light and locked the door behind me, I whispered softly, to the memory of my father, to the years that tested me, and to the silence that saved me. You were right, Dad. Taking care of each other is all that matters. I just had to learn it the hard way. Sometimes, the best revenge is living well, quietly, humbly, and at peace. I'm older now. The company runs smoothly without me having to be there every day. Most mornings, I just sit on the porch with my coffee, watching people head to work, faces full of purpose, some anxious, some tired, all chasing something. I remember when that was me. Life looks different when you've stopped running. When you've already walked through the fire and learned how to breathe in the smoke without choking. That's when you stop asking why things happened, and start understanding what they were teaching you. Michael still works with me. He runs one of our branches now. He's calm, humble, and sometimes too apologetic, as if he still carries the guilt of our past. But I remind him often. We're good, brother. We've both learned. On weekends, he visits with his kids. They call me Uncle Dave, and every time I hear that, I feel something warm inside. Maybe this is what peace sounds like. Children laughing in the same yard where brothers once argued. There's a small frame in my study, my father's handwriting from that note he left us. Take care of each other. I used to think it was a command. Now I see it as a reminder, a way to stay human even when life hardens you. When you're young, you think winning means being right. But when you've lived long enough, you realize that winning means being at peace. One rainy afternoon, I found an old box in the attic, full of letters, blueprints, and the early sketches from my garage days. The ink was faded, the paper rough, but as I touched each sheet, memories came flooding back. Nights without sleep, days without food, dreams that refused to die. I smiled. Not because I made it, but because I never quit. I folded one of those old papers, my first business plan, written in pencil, and slipped it into my desk drawer. It reminded me that everything big starts small, and everything small begins with belief. Sometimes I visit the office unannounced. I don't give speeches or check performance reports. I just walk through, listening to laughter, watching young faces full of ideas. They don't know my story, at least not the whole of it. But every once in a while, someone will recognize me from the framed photo in the lobby. They'll smile shyly and say, "You're the founder, right? You must be proud." And I always answer the same way. Proud, yes. But more grateful than proud. Because gratitude lasts longer than pride ever will. When I look at that name, Miller Tech Solutions, I don't just see a business. I see every night I spent fixing broken things, not just machines but my own self. I see the betrayal that once broke my heart, and the silence that rebuilt it stronger. People think revenge is about hurting someone. It's not. It's about proving to yourself that you were always enough, even when others couldn't see it. Sometimes, I think about that day in Michael's office, the one when he asked me for the partnership. How he couldn't meet my eyes. How I chose to help instead of hate. If I had turned him down back then, maybe he would have never learned humility. And maybe I would have never learned compassion. We both needed that moment, not as enemies, but as brothers who had lost their way and found it again. Last winter, we buried Mom. She passed away quietly in her sleep. At her funeral, Michael stood beside me. No suits, no business talk, just two sons remembering their mother. After everyone left, he placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Dad was right. You really did take care of us." I didn't answer. I just nodded. Sometimes silence says everything. That lake hasn't changed much. The same wooden dock. The same slow waves. The same quiet air that always knew how to listen. I come here often, not to think, but to feel. To remind myself that the man who once sat here broken is gone. And in his place sits someone who learned that peace isn't found after revenge. It's found after forgiveness. Because forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It means you remember without the pain. Every story has an ending. But some stories don't end in fireworks or applause. They end in calm. In mornings where your heart doesn't rush, your phone doesn't matter, and your past feels like an old movie you can finally watch without tears. Mine is one of those stories. It began with humiliation, passed through silence, and ended with peace. And if you ask me now, was it worth it? Yes. Every second. Because I didn't just get even. I got better. Sometimes silence is the best revenge. Because silence lets time do what anger never can. It lets the truth speak for you.